Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. I'm nervous. So I'm just going to get that out there. I have some notes I'm going to refer to, but I'm so grateful to be here. So grateful to be here. So grateful to be recovering codependent. And I need you guys. So I'm just so blessed, and it's so awesome to see so many people from around the world. It's just, wow, my heart is full. Um, My story, I was born on the south side of Chicago into a Roman Catholic family. I was the oldest of six, am the oldest of six kids. My mother came from a very rageful, violent, alcoholic home. She was a midlife baby to her mother and the youngest of six children. Her father already was a barely functioning alcoholic, and her mother used her as a shield from pretty much birth and kept her in her bed at night until the day she got married. So my mother went literally from her mother's bed to her husband's bed, and that was a Freudian slip. um, when she got married. Her father, her oldest sister, and two brothers were dead from alcoholism by the time she was 22 years old. So death was a big part of their lives and kind of a normal, but not grief. So death was accepted as God's will, but grieving and feelings were not. Um, she too would become a rageful and violent alcoholic. At 20, whoops, I want to start my timer, you guys. Uh, at 20, she got married. And my father had been in the seminary, and he had been studying to become a priest. And he literally, before he took his vows, realized that he couldn't handle celibacy. Lo and behold, he turned out to be a sex addict. And so he was told to run out and marry a good Catholic girl and make lots of little Catholic babies, which he did. So I came along, my mom was 21, and then every 14 months later, she popped out another one. So by the time she was 28 years old, she had seven kids, and they were all under the age, I'm sorry, six kids, all under the age of seven and down. My dad was a narcissist and a workaholic. So my mom was basically a single mom. And we saw him occasionally for dinner, but most of the time we were already in bed by the time he came home. And he would golf on Saturdays. We didn't see him basically all week until Sundays. Sundays were family days, and he would take us to church, and then we'd usually go visit family or go for a drive or whatever. But that was the only family day that my dad was around. He just expected a beautiful wife, a clean home, and well-behaved children. And we felt like he was the king and we were all his subjects. So we were actually very afraid of my dad because he was just this big, tall, 6'4", kind of scary guy that visited. We didn't really feel like he was an active part of our daily lives. So as you can imagine, my mother was very angry, and she took that anger out on us. My father took his anger out at my mother's drinking on us. And my dad used to favor bare bottom spankings without warning. And my mother would just violently rage at us, throwing dishes and blaming us for her woes. But my mother was also, because she had no skills of motherhood, zero, she had these kids and she literally had never babysat. She had no idea. So she treated us physically pretty violently. She just didn't, it was like we were dolls or something. She just had no concept. And unless it involved a trip to the hospital, which there were many, my father never knew what went on at home. She just didn't tell him. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but there were a lot of really bad events. And mainly, a lot of it was out of her ignorance and out of her rage, just blind emotional rage. And I believe that my mother, in addition to her drinking blackouts, had a lot of emotional blackouts where she would just go off in a rage and just would black out and she would just do wild, crazy things. So call it mental illness, call it whatever, but it was a big deal. My father's workaholism and his affairs kept him away from more and more from home. My mom's drinking really got bad. And the first time they separated, I was 13 years old. And as I saw my father walking out of the door, as little as he was home, he was like the sane parent. We at least thought he was the one that was sane. And then we were left with this screaming, raging alcoholic, standing there throwing a fit in the kitchen. So I just kind of made a decision right at that moment. That was the first time. I had always been my mom's little helper. I was changing diapers at 4 because she just, she needed the help. And I got a big kick out of that. My ego from the age of 4 on was based totally on my self worth was helping my mommy, helping my siblings. That was who I was. I didn't realize it, and I had many therapists over the years, but I really didn't have a childhood, and I had no clue. That was a big part of my denial about my growing up. Um, so I just decided at that moment that somebody had to step up. So it became a conscious thing for me at 13. My dad walks out, I'm left with this crazy, insane mother, and I just made this decision that, mom and dad could be assholes, but we were going to be the Brady Bunch. So I decided that I was going to, make sure that we had dinner on the table, make sure that the clothes were clean, make sure that the chores and the homework were done. So I truly stepped up into the mother role, which is typical of an alcoholic household. So I just took over more and more of my mom's duties, and my mom could slip off into the bedroom and live in her alcoholic haze. So it was also born out of this deep sense of needing to feel safe. I never felt safe. And the reason I brought up my Roman Catholic background is church was scary, school was scary. We had the old fashioned nuns with the rulers and the yardsticks. And I mean, there was just no safe place. Home was scary, work, I mean, everything was scary. So when people talk to me about where was your safe place, it's like I didn't have one. I don't know what you're talking about. So I wanted my siblings, that was another thing at 13. I wanted my siblings to have a sense of kind of some normalcy and a sense of safety. So they learned to, and of course, I felt very empowered by this role. So, they came to me all the time when there were problems or fights or whatever. I was the parent that they would come to, even though I wasn't much older than them. So I wanted to, save my siblings and give them a sense of nurturing and love that they didn't get from our parents. Um, and this was a huge survival tool for me. My codependent control patterns are deeply, deeply ingrained because of this pattern that I had. I became very manipulative. I wanted things to go my way, and because that was what made me feel safe. And it was just a huge, huge part of my survival. My mom did get into AA at the end of my high school years. My dad, of course, was traveling through Europe as a 24-year-old flight attendant, and I was working on my college admission. When I did finally leave home for college, I became terrified. I just had no idea who I was. I had no idea how to live my life for myself. Um, I just became despondent, very apathetic. My whole life had revolved around taking care of my siblings and even my mother. So I had no clue how to live without that. Um, and I became suicidal. And seriously, only through the grace of God, I didn't commit suicide. I made it home. And my mom, God bless her, got me into therapy for the first time at 19. And it truly was a gift from God. I did start learning a little bit about, how to love myself, how to just focus on myself. But the therapist happened to be a friend of the family. And because my father had been such a horrible, critical, perfection was not the ideal, it was supposed to be the norm. And we used to call him and my grandmother, his mother, the Velvet Hammer. You know, so the compliments were, oh, what a nice dress. Too bad they didn't have it in your size, honey. Oh, you look so nice today. Too bad you couldn't do something about your hair. It was just always this constant diatribe of just not good enough. And never took an interest in, now my brother was raised by a different parent, my different father. He had and his life is very different. But the girls were not, he just expected everybody to get married and live happily ever after. And we were going to be somebody else's problem. That was kind of he was really a throwback to another generation. So, so for the next 40 years, even though I had tried therapy in and out, my codependent patterns just thrived. I only dated men who I perceived as needing me. They were all addicts of one kind or another. All my bosses were alcoholics. I became a terrible, terrible workaholic in both my professional and private life. I treated my relationships like, that was a big job too. So I was a workaholic at home and I was a workaholic in my, professional life. And I never got any rewards for that. I always did it so that somebody else succeeded and I never saw the rewards. So that was another big pattern in my life that showed up. So I finally married a man who was starting his own business. And of course, that was a big hook for me. And this was my biggest investment and my biggest loss. After several failed attempts, we lost everything for the third time and finally divorced. I was broke, literally homeless, and 56 years old. Depression doesn't really cover how I felt. My higher power stepped in, and I finally went back into 12-step programs for myself. As a child, I had gone into Alateen. I had done ACA when they first opened up, but when I hit this bottom, I knew that I had tried everything under the sun with regards to seminars and therapy and spent tens of thousands of dollars, but I really had not given the 12-step programs a shot for me, where I just came in from just focusing on me. And of course, even saying that, you guys, when I first came into CoDA, I think it took me 6 months before I could finally get through a meeting without thinking of all the other people in my life that needed to be there. I was still doing that. I mean, it took me for what seemed like forever. And finally, my HP kicked in and said, you're here for you. So that's how ingrained my thinking pattern was for other people. So, so I knew that I was finally going to work on me, but I needed a safe place to do this. I was in so much pain and feeling so raw and so vulnerable. I didn't have even my own home didn't feel safe to me because I had no one to blame for my misery. I thought I was just going crazy. I just thought I was going crazy. So I still felt like I had to put on a brave face and show everybody how together I was, even though I was dying inside. When I first walked into the CoDA rooms, I knew I've heard other people say, this, but I really did feel like, oh, I'm home now. This is it. This is where I put my big girl pants on and, finally grow up. In my relationship with myself, with my relationship with my higher power, and with my relationship with others. This is a very raw and painful journey. And I needed the principle of the fourth tradition, which I am going to read. Each group should remain autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or CoDA as a whole. This is a boundary for me. That's what this tradition stands for me. The good news is we get to be autonomous, and I always take, each tradition personally. So I get to be autonomous, but I still have to uphold the traditions of my program. I live my program. I work my program, but I live it in my daily life. So meetings had to be safe for me. Otherwise, I'd have no recovery. And meetings were my lifeblood when I first came into the program. I went to 5 meetings a night. When I traveled, I always looked out to find out where the local meeting was, CoDA meeting was. Now, of course, thank God we can Zoom anytime, and I actually kind of hope that stays. It's just a great luxury. I used to travel 45 minutes to get to my meetings there and back, and the meeting might only be 45 minutes to an hour long. But because of the fourth tradition, I could count on, no matter where I went, I had a safe place to be with people like me who were learning to recover one day at a time. While each group has its own personality, the principles were always the same. I didn't have to be afraid of judgment or verbal comments because of the crosstalk guidelines. I knew that I could share whatever I needed for myself without judgment or comment. I could participate in group conscious decisions and be heard. Even if the decision didn't go my way, I learned this was not personal. That was a huge thing for me. I didn't take it personally. Oh, there's a surprise. And I learned to trust my higher power's voice being heard through the group conscience. Oh, maybe God's got a better idea. There's a concept, the creator of the universe. Who knew? I always felt the presence. I always feel the presence of God at my meetings. And I heard a lot of people at the beginning complaining about the Zoom meetings, but I feel the presence of God always, even on our Zoom meetings, because my higher power speaks through all of us. And that's how I hear God. This tradition has also helped me with family and work relationships. I do not take what is said to me personally. Most of the time, it's their shit, whatever their problems are. But I do listen and I take in what is mine and clean up my side. But I have to do that with my higher power, not with that person. I listen to what they say. I realize, where am I? And if I'm getting really emotionally flustered and my triggers are getting triggered, I have to take that to my HP and clean up my side and then go back and address whatever the issue is. When my emotions are running high, it's always about me. I become totally narcissistic and think that it's all about me when it's not. And that always gets me in trouble. This tradition to me is especially important for newcomers because this is who our meetings are for. Some of the meetings that I attended when I first came into CoDA, because I tried many, many meetings, but there were several that read a lot of non-CoDA literature, non-CoDA approved literature, and I was so hungry for recovery. And I went out and bought every book and bought everything because I thought that's what I was going to need to get my recovery. And it wasn't until I started working with a sponsor that I realized the tools that I needed were already here. I just needed to use the tools that were already provided and had already been pre-approved by all my other following recovering codependents who had already walked the walk. And that's what I needed. So recovery was confusing enough for me. I just didn't need to be further confused. So that's another reason I think this tradition is very important. I found plenty of wisdom and plenty of work in the 12 steps and the 12 traditions of CoDA, and that's why I really love these workshops. I also learned responsibility from this tradition. I have a responsibility to CoDA as a whole to uphold the principles of the program. And in each of my meetings, do we want to have an open meeting or do we want to have a closed meeting? Is this women only? Is this men only? How long do we want the meeting to last? What CoDA approved literature do we want to read at our meeting? There's tons of literature. There are lots of decisions that each group gets to make with regard to the setup of their meeting. And that's why I also love the idea of everything being decided by a group conscious because it invites our higher power. Our higher power is truly in control and not individual beings. And that is how I have to live my life today. And that's what CoDA has really done for me. I was terrified of the mystery of life. Death was very inviting because it was easy, but the mystery of life was excruciating for me. And I have to live and walk with my higher power in complete trust and faith, and it's a muscle I work every day to continue to live in that mystery. And that's what our meetings are. We never know what's going to come up. We never know what's going to happen. But I always trust that my higher power and your higher powers are involved. And that's why I love this tradition. So thank you so much for letting me share.
For welcoming me.
Thanks so much. Yeah, take it away, Shannon. I'm recording.
I'm super excited to be here. And thank you so much, Anne, for being brave and going first, because I was really nervous and I was like, look at Anne go. So I'm still nervous, but that's just kind of part of who I am. So I'm really, really grateful to be asked to share here on Tradition 4. This is such a great series. And yeah, it's been really super interesting and surreal to be sharing over Zoom. I still kind of struggle with the lack of context and body language and hugs and stuff, but also it's opened up this ability for us to hear from so many different people from all over the place. And I get to be in the States without getting into an airplane. So that's awesome. So I did take a few notes because, like I said, I can get a little rambly. I live in Saskatchewan in Canada. And for those that don't know, it's kind of a little bit west to the middle of Canada. And there's a lot of prairies here. And then further north of where I live is more trees. I live right between, in this boreal parkland area. So, okay. And I go to the Experience, Strength, and Hope group in Saskatoon. And we're also online right now. So anybody here is most welcome to come join us on a Monday or Thursday evening at 7:30 Central Standard Time or 2 p.m. Central Standard Time on Saturdays. So I am just going to read the Tradition 4 again, just to get centered here. Each group should remain autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or CoDA as a whole. Well, first of all, I'd like to start off with what the traditions in general have meant for my recovery. My very first CoDA meeting, I came in completely shell-shocked. I was full of terror and fear, and I had been carrying this bag of fear since I could remember. And the thing that really was the big, rock bottom was I couldn't leave my house. My fear had consolidated itself into agoraphobia, and I had struggled with different phobias over the years, also with different mental health issues such as depression and anxiety. So when I came to CoDA, it was after having reached out to mental health and getting through actually being able to leave my house. And then I went to a CoDA meeting in Saskatoon, which is actually 100 kilometers away from where I live. So I totally feel people who need to drive further to get to a meeting. And it's another reason I really appreciate the Zoom meetings. So I remember calling the phone number I found online because my brother, who was in another program, said, "You're codependent. You should go to Codependence Anonymous." And I was like, okay. And I looked it up and I kind of sniffed around codependency and I was like reading about it and I was like, ugh, I don't like that this relates so much to me. But anyway, so I called the phone number I found on the internet, and those of you who know Richard, he answered the phone, and I said in a very shaky, terrified voice, I think I might be codependent. Is it okay if I come to one of your meetings? And we always laugh about that now. But I did end up at the meeting in Saskatoon, Experience, Strength, and Hope. It'll be almost 10 years ago next week. And I was greeted with a very warm welcome and that feeling of, oh, this is where the mothership dropped the rest of my real family off. So yeah, I knew right away when I heard people share that I belonged there, even though I had trouble opening up and sharing for a very long time. I especially had trouble with men in the program. Like I just couldn't I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't make eye contact. It was just that was a really hard part for me of having to, yes, Nancy, having to like feel safe in an environment that was mixed like that. And anyways, in my very first meeting, I was invited to stay afterwards for a business meeting. And I was like, well, you're not good. Wait, I don't need to be here. You don't need to hear from this crazy person. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was encouraged to stick around and see how it worked. And I watched this group conscious process play out to make decisions together. And I was amazed. I was like, wow, people can do that? I mean, like in my house, making decisions, first of all, didn't happen together at all. I came from an family environment of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And also from a family environment of like, you are not your own person. Like, you do not have agency in your life. And so that's programming that Codependence Anonymous has done a lot of good in my life, reprogramming. So anyways, to be asked to participate in this group conscience process just blew my mind. And it gave me a really early appreciation for the traditions. Because I think when I first came and I read those, or I heard those traditions, they didn't really make sense to me. But when I went to that group conscious meeting and I heard more about the traditions and read more literature and listened to people who've been in the program for longer, I really saw how much those traditions are all about boundaries, something that I had no clue about when I came to CoDA, like at all. Like I said, I didn't have a sense of I was my own person and I had my own agency. So tradition 4, autonomy. I love this principle. I looked up the etymology of autonomy because I'm kind of a nerd. And it comes from the Greek auto and nomos. And those two separate parts of the word mean self and government. And so like, for this tradition is all about my own self-governance, which has to do with my responsibility to myself, to my higher power, and to who I am in the world, so in relation to others. Because my codependency is a disease of extremes, and I came from not the most nurturing home environment, I sort of would vacillate between being a doormat or being like ragey and dominating. Like there was no in between where I could like just have a calm conversation with somebody and accept that they have a different opinion and I have a different opinion. And, you know, even though that might not be the same, doesn't mean we can't coexist peacefully together. It was like, I either submitted to somebody else's ideas or I flipped out and either cut people off or freaked out or, you know, some other extreme dramatic behavior. And so this tradition has really taught me this gray, the gray zone of like not needing to submit to what other people do and not being counter-dependent and just completely blowing off other people because I don't necessarily agree with their ideas. This tradition for me is about consulting with my higher power about what's important to me and about decisions. And when I do that, when I take the time to connect and get quiet when it comes to making decisions, I can hear from my higher power about what I might need to do next in terms of, is this going to affect somebody else? And if that's the case, I can consult with somebody else about how they may be affected by my decision. Such a rational way to go about making decisions in my life. I came to Codependence Anonymous not being terrified of making decisions. I never wanted to make the wrong one because I never knew if somebody was going to scream at me or shut me out of their life. And this program really has been teaching me how to grow up and make decisions. You know, make wrong decisions. That's okay. There's no wrong decision really. But I mean, there's so much room for error. There's so much room for mistakes, and I have to be able to make those. And the autonomy of tradition 4 gives me the freedom to make mistakes and the safety to make mistakes as well. So I really liked how all the traditions interlock together, and I was thinking about, I did some journaling about this tradition, and I was thinking about how does the tradition of autonomy support the tradition 1 of unity in our program. And because it, you know, on the surface it looks like a paradox. Oh, it's you're united or you're autonomous, and the two really need each other. It's really about interdependence. For unity to work, I've learned that it's not about having a hive mind, and it's not about everybody being the same. It's about agreeing that in our diversity, we all have a place and we're all equal. Promise 7 tells me promise 6 tells me I learned to see myself as equal to others. My new and renewed relationships are all with equal partners. That's probably my favorite promise in all of the promises, although some weeks other promises are my favorite. But learning that I was an equal to others has been like one of the hugest gifts of this program, that I can just value myself as much as I value another human being, that I'm not any better or any worse than anybody else, and that my uniqueness doesn't keep me separate. It keeps me part of this human race, which is full of uniqueness and full of people making mistakes and people learning and people growing. And I get to be one of those people. The other promise that I really find relates to this tradition is promise 11. And I'm just going to read that. I trust the guidance I receive from my higher power and come to believe in my own capabilities. So CoDA has really brought me to a point in my life where I'm in a position at work where I have to speak up for people because I do shop stewarding. So when there's something that's not congruent with how things should be for workers, it's my job to speak up. If you told me before this program that I would be doing that, I would say you're nuts. I would never speak to a manager. Like, that just terrified me. And now I have miraculously have these tools to be able to engage with different types of people that have different types of opinions about things, and be grounded and firm in knowing that I'm equal to them, and that what I have to say is just as important as the next person. The other tradition that, well, all the traditions kind of interlock together, but the other tradition that really comes up for me with tradition 4 is tradition 2, seeking the group conscience and the consciousness of our higher power being our only authority. I see autonomy as a sort of, it's really interesting because it's the boundaries that gives me the freedom to be who I am in my life and in the program. And so being able to participate with a group of people who can say, I have a higher power and I'm going to reach out to that higher power and get still and listen and really take myself out of this picture and come at things from the perspective of being guided by a universe that has an intelligence and a mystery and beauty that is beyond my wildest dreams. I'm going to try that. And it works. Like, anytime I'm freaking out, I just have to talk to God anytime that I don't know what to do, I talk to God. And even if I'm making decisions with people that aren't necessarily doing that as well, it doesn't matter. You know, I act as if that's what everybody is doing. They're doing their best to connect with that higher wisdom. And I find when I do that, I am not so concerned even about the outcome of the decision. I'm not going to say that that means I don't sometimes dislike decisions that groups of people make that I'm involved in, but I can accept that that's how it is, and that I'm going to be just fine no matter what. Moving on from there. I'm just going to check my notes because I think I'm missing something here. 1 second. Oh, yes. Yes. So one of the other things that I learned early in the program from my beautiful sponsor, she talked to me about what my business was and the difference between my business and God's business and your business. And once again, it's boundaries. It's that remembering that I have this imaginary hula hoop around me and that all the things within it are my responsibility and for me to take care of. And all the things outside of it are either God's or your responsibility. And when I start trying to get into your hula hoop, there's going to be problems. And if I let other people too readily into my hula hoop and start making decisions for me on my behalf, there's going to be problems. So the semi-permeable barrier or boundary there is always open to my higher power, but I have to remember that, you know, that I'm separate from people, but not in an isolating way. You know, I end and you begin. There's no sort of enmeshment, and we aren't these like mythical creatures that blend together. And I read this quote the other day about, it said something like, love, it was something along the lines of, love is two souls in one body or something. And it just freaked me out. It creeped me out so much. I was like, no, I don't want to be in a relationship where I've melded into or disappeared because of another person. Like I
Shannon,
used to say, sorry?
you have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Like I used to say when I first came to CoDA, I felt like an amoeba, and I just let everybody in and I had no boundaries. So yeah, I guess the boundaries thing is really the hugest takeaway for this tradition, and how it plays out in my life, in other relationships, and then also how I see it play out in the groups has been really instrumental to me just growing up as a human being and learning how to take responsibility for my own decisions and my own path, and accepting myself for the mistakes I make and applying the steps and the traditions to every aspect of my life. It's made life a joy that I didn't think I would ever find before I got here. So thanks so much for letting me share, everyone. I just wish I could hug you all, and I really appreciate the Arizona group allowing me to come and speak with everyone. And yeah, thanks.
Shannon,